Wajah, nisam ginu Yemen, minukta nashke yan yan limunan. Nashke we miskumane jiwi samgan upnahao. Nashke we watemgo ganji dino jutnahao chido. I don't think that there was translation for that, so I'll translate it myself. I said, good evening, thank you for having me. My name is Mandy Gull. It's a pleasure to be here. I spoke in my language first because we still speak Cree fluently, and it's with pride that we share that we still have that ability to do so. And I also acknowledge that we are here on the unceded territory of the Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. I would first like to thank Ted for reading that out. It's the first time that I've seen somebody read my bio in front of me, and I thought, man, I need a holiday. It's really a pleasure to be here this evening. It's my first time here. It's my first time working with Nature Canada. I do have a lot of NGO partnerships working with the Cree Nation. I'm going to give a little overview of what the Cree Nation is, where we are. I'm going to speak a little bit about our relationships, and then I'm going to try to give some tips to help get you guys included in your orientation, the kinds of questions that I would like to see as a First Nations be asked on my behalf by a nature group. So I'm from the Cree Nation of Iwishchi. We call our territory Iwishchi. It is the James Bay area of northern Quebec. Our territory spans a little over 300,000 square kilometers. In context, our staff likes to say it's about the size of the country of Jordan, so it's a very, very large territory. We use and live and continue to occupy every part of that territory. We're a nation of 20,000. We are an incredibly unique nation in Canada. In 1975, we signed an agreement with the province of Quebec, and we've been able to work towards attaining self-government in a way that I think is very unique for Aboriginal peoples in Canada. We do govern ourselves. There are 10 Cree communities in the territory, and we also implement our own health services, our own education services. We have our own justice system, we have our own police force. They're all regionally organized, but we're really, really involved in trying to maintain the way that we speak Cree, the authentic Cree. We are encountering a lot of language change because of English. There are a lot of people that are also trilingual, so French is speaking in some of the communities. And we also work really hard to ensure that we continue the Cree way of life. And that means living in harmony with our territory. I come from a family where my husband is a hunter, so 90% of our diet comes from wildlife in the territory. So we have a very close relationship with our territory. Each community has a system of trap lines where a family is assigned a trap line, and that trap line is an area set aside for that family and other land users, people that they wish to share the trap line with, to hunt, fish, and trap. People are still very active in doing that. We have 2 periods of time where I always say my husband loses his mind. This is during the spring when the geese come up north, and all he talks about is hunting geese and killing geese and where these geese are and how many geese he saw. And he gets goose fever, they call it. And then we also have a period in the fall where he gets buck fever, and he just talks about moose and where the moose are, and I saw a moose, and he's a very avid hunter, and it is because we are a family that survives off of a Cree traditional diet. And his other season is the summer. He loves to fish. He doesn't talk to me about fish like nonstop, but he loves to fish also. So, I really represent a nation that tries to live in harmony with its territory, because it's just not an area that we inhabit, but it's also an area that sustains our being of who we are. The majority of the Cree language is taught from land-based instruction, so it also represents everything that we learn about our culture. And I think that's really unique about the Cree of Quebec, because this is not something that is very common across Canada, that you have First Nations that speaks their language, that still has a traditional territory, that still engages with it, that is a growing population that in essence self-governs in many domains affecting the health and well-being of its members. I can say that I've traveled to many First Nations communities always very beautiful, always very open, but I'm proud to say that my nation, I believe that we represent the gold standard in trying to be a self-governing people and trying to determine our future. So I became a politician by fluke accident. I actually, I'm going to share a little bit about myself. Yes, I started my career in 2014 politically. Before that, I was a behind-the-scenes person, so I worked in our band office, which is essentially a municipal office. I always worked in the legislative department with our chief, our executive director, our director general. And, after working in that division allows you to build a lot of relationships with your community members. And I found that the ones that really interested me the most and had the best stories and the best knowledge and the best information were people that were coming from our local CTA, which is a Cree Trappers Association. And these people were coming in and they were talking to me about their trap lines and the state of their trap lines and the activities on the trap lines, and seeing the presence of, industrial development in their trap lines, and talking to me about, when they were younger, they grew up in the bush, or they remembered, their sibling was born in the bush in a tent, and how much their parents worked and how their mother worked, and the relationship with harvesting food and harvesting plant life to eat, and the role that each season played in what their family would be doing. I just found that so interesting because that was completely different from my childhood. I have a trapline. My grandfather has maintained a trapline. He maintained a trapline his whole life until he passed away. It's a very patriarchal trapline system. And it's a system that's handed down to the first son. So every first son inherits their father's trapline. That is not a Cree system. That was a system that was created for the Cree by Indian Affairs. So it's not the true Cree system. The Cree have adopted it and they've made changes. So it's becoming modernized where there's now an opportunity for women to be tallyman of the trapline, but it's slowly changing. I grew up on a trapline that was heavily impacted by forestry. Ted mentioned that I'm from the community of Waswanipi. We have 63 traplines, the most. We are the community with the most traplines in the Cree territory. Of those 63 traplines, 90% of them are impacted by forestry. So we've had a long-standing relationship with the forestry industry in my family. It was completely normal for me growing up to see forestry operations, to see tree planters coming in, to be passing, these huge trucks with trees cut down. I had never really put any thought into it because, this was just a norm for my family. I had not been exposed to other types of traplines. And I was invited, I had developed this relationship with all these tallymen. And one of the tallymen, who is now a very dear friend to me by the name of Don Simon Sagnash, he invited me to his trapline. And Don's trapline is one of the few remaining traplines. There's only 4 that are completely untouched by forestry. And when I went to this trapline, I could not believe the look of his land. I was so shocked for somebody that, lives in the bush, has gone hunting, has been with my family growing up my whole entire life, to see the quality of the trees, of the lichen, of the forest, of the water, of the wildlife, of the lack of roads, of the quietness, just shocked me. It shook me to the core. And to be there with Don's family and to hear them talk about, the relationship that they have with their territory is so unique, is some of the last traplines left intact, that they really wanted to ensure that that was protected. Not only for the family, but for the Crees of Waswanipi. Anybody can come to that trapline and can continue to interact with the wildlife or the water or the forest in the way that they need be. There are a lot of land-based programs in my culture, so healing, if you're looking for healing, if you're looking for rehabilitation, there's a lot of youth-based programs that do paddling journeys completely across the territory. And this little oasis completely changed my life. And one of the things that Dawn asked me was, Mandy, I really think that you're somebody who's able to, help us get what we need to protect this forest. And I became completely devoted to really trying to work to protect the Broadback River Valley. that was one of the fights that I took up for a number of years. For about 3 years, I was working very closely with some of our partners, with NRDC, with CPAWS, with SNAP Quebec. I had the opportunity to meet a lot of groups during this time, you know, lobbying the Quebec government, lobbying the federal government to try to ensure the protection of this intact forest. I think that I did such a good job that members from other communities recognized my work and wanted to ensure that this became a regional file, and I was elected to be the second Deputy Grand Chief of my nation, the last one being 20 years ago. So I was very pleased to represent, you know, the members of my nation doing this. The Cree have a very unique relationship with the provincial government because we signed an agreement in 1975. So we're a little bit different. We work very closely with Quebec. I think we work even closer with Quebec than we do with the federal. And that relationship has been a long-standing one. At times it's been very challenging, at times it's been very beneficial to us. But I think that, you know, the opportunity to work with different organizations that support the Broadback River Valley taught me things in lobbying that I don't think I would have ever learned just being a politician. I say just being a politician because, you know, you always have this great team of people that you work with, and you are the communicator, you are the voice, but I have a really exceptional team. The Cree Nation government has a department that is stellar. They're absolutely amazing. This past year, we had 3 staff working on one file. We applied for Challenge Fund monies, and we were one of the largest benefactors of the fund, so I'm extremely proud of my staff. And the work that we do at the regional level, we're not only working to protect the forest, we also have a number of species that are at risk, the biggest one being the caribou. The diet of the Cree consists mainly of geese and caribou, so the caribou to us is, you know, what's that saying, the canary in the coal mine. If something is going on with the caribou, then the rest of, you know, your territory is affected. They're extremely delicate species. The Cree really take a lot of effort and work into ensuring that we're able to harmonize our harvesting of them. And the forestry and the mining operations that are slowly creeping up into the territory are really affecting their habitat. So I may have started as a forest campaigner. I kind of morphed into trying to really work at every environmental file. I'm very pleased. I think it's rare that you get to see a politician who spends like maybe 75% of her working time in the environment domain. I think that's one of the benefits, is that I was assigned those files that were very important to me. But, you know, we work with a number of partners, and we're not only looking at wildlife, we look at water, we look at development, we look at birding. Ted is one of our partners working with us. We're doing a lot of work to ensure that our Challenge Fund dollars are used in the best interest of the Cree Nation's territory. So these are some of the things that are coming up for our territory in the next few years. But I think what's most important is that the Cree have created something unique with the relationship with the provincial and federal governments. And I say unique because as part of our agreements, we do have tables set up, standing liaison committees, where we speak directly to extremely high level of authority. So we have a table with the Premier of Quebec. When issues get to a certain point, we're able to call on him and sit with him one-on-one. We have a standing liaison table where we meet with high-level officials in Quebec and high-level officials at the federal also, so there's 2 tables. And I think that has really allowed for us to really push for issues that are important to the Cree. Some of you, I don't know, we last year, 2 years ago, had a very big win where we were able to stop uranium mining in our territory. So that was a big success for the Cree. We did not use any of the measures put in place with our agreement that allows us to assess projects moving forward. We actually used public measures for that win. It was a big success for the Cree because we were very concerned for uranium mining to come in. We are impacted by a lot of gold mining, a lot of lithium. There's a number of critical elements in our territory that the industry is seeking to extract. But, you know, we're really trying to use the agreements and the mechanisms that we have in place to try to ensure that we can continue to maintain the Cree way of life. That is the first and foremost desire of every Cree politician, is to continue to practice that way of life, to protect it, and to protect the Cree rights of every person in the nation for generations to come. I think that's something that's really important. You know, we signed an agreement in 1975. That's not that long ago, that's less than 50 years ago. And still to this day, I think the understanding that the rights of First Nations people are different. You know, they are different. I cannot, as much as I live in Canada, I live in Quebec, I still consider myself a Cree before any and above all other titles. Because my identity and my culture and my link to my land and my territory are so important that I cannot fathom any other title superseding that. And I think that's, you know, the role in Canada is that every person is allowed equality and freedom to express who they are. But I think that sometimes that there's been a challenge with First Nations, and I think it's not well understood why. You know, there's been a difficult relationship with the Crown for First Nations across Canada. And I think that there are a number of people, you know, coming forward now, the youth especially, are starting to showcase that there's an expectation that they want to continue expressing who they are as First Nations. They want their rights and their relationship with their traditional territories to be respected so that they continue moving forward and continuing to live that way of life. And I do think, you know, maybe it's not going to be the most politically correct thing to say, but I do feel like sometimes your average Canadian doesn't understand what that means, or that there's a sense of fear of not understanding what that expectation is. So being a First Nations leader, I always like to include a component of reconciliation. And, you know, as a First Nations person, I'm not a residential school survivor, but my mother was, so I'm the first generation affected by residential school. I do believe that there has to be a process of reconciliation from those parties that were involved in that process. And the fact that this was a norm procedure in Canada, I think that makes it challenging, but I do feel like Canadians on a large scale, the ones that I've met, are interested to know how can we contribute to ensuring that First Nations people are protected and continue to move forward with their identity and rights intact in the Canadian space. And for me, reconciliation is always a part of environmental activities. And I've told this to different groups that I've met with, from students, from members of parliament, from companies that I've worked with. I really believe if you want to ensure reconciliation reaches the highest and most effective point in time, you must do it through the environment. Everything that you can do, from minimizing your purchases, minimizing your impact on the environment, trying to find out what issues First Nations face in their territory. These are all acts of reconciliation. I had a discussion with some of the students at their college, and I asked them, if you guys can ensure that you stop using styrofoam, that to me is an act of reconciliation. I think that measures that you take to respect the planet and respect the Canadian landscape, the being of First Nations, you're doing your part in reconciliation. And I think that's something that has to be communicated very clearly to Canadians, that, if you're involved in processes that contribute back to the environment, you are doing your part for reconciliation. And I and people from my nation recognize that process. So I want to, share a little bit of the environmental issues that we face in the Cree territory. We are, like I mentioned earlier, very heavily impacted by forestry. I was taught by some of the groups that we work with what that impact was, because to me, forestry really meant, seeing these trees cut down and being transported out. And I was not aware of the impact of viscose, the purchase of pulp, and the clothing that you wear and the amount of viscose that is used in the development of your clothing materials and your household materials. So I strongly encourage you guys to look into what type of viscose is used in your clothing material, and to ensure that the sourcing is sustainable and transparent, and that companies are held accountable. I also had the opportunity to work on a file regarding toilet paper. Not the most sexiest, but a file that became so interesting to me because I wasn't aware that 2 of the mills in our territory were actually sourcing a lot of virgin forest for their toiletry products. So I have been sharing a lot of information regarding toilet paper, tissue paper, and paper towels. Some of my members look at me like, what is this lady always talking about toilet paper? But I think it's so important for you to realize that the home purchases that you make do have an impact on First Nations territory. We also looked at the use of styrofoam. My nation was able to launch a challenge this year to ban styrofoam. We're working towards eradicating the complete use of styrofoam in the Cree territory. It was a major learning curve for our nation because, you know, it is remote, things are expensive, to fly things in is costly. So asking people to adopt, you know, using Tupperware or reusable materials or materials that are friendlier to the environment was a big learning curve for people. And I felt like it was very, almost like a reignition of cultural practices, because 40 years ago, we were having feasts and people would come to feasts with their traditional bundles. And that bundle was, you know, a fork, a plate, whatever you brought from home, you brought it there, you ate, you took it home, you washed it, you know, at your camp. And we had suddenly moved into this disposable culture where people, you know, were buying cups and plates, and trying to get people to realize this is a reclamation of your culture if you use traditional bundles was a very interesting thing, because we had these elders coming to feasts with the most beautiful traditional bundles, you know, that it had been a source of pride. And then we had some youth coming with like 2 cups they threw in a bag. And then these elders were exchanging with the youth and teaching them, oh, you know, when you put a lot of effort into this, it kind of represents you, and it represents how serious you take your impact on the environment. So we've had some challenges. We're trying to move towards some different processes locally. We do, I think, see that we are a nation that is growing very quickly. Industrial development is one of the things that impacts us a lot. We have a lot of mining activity. I worked on the mining portfolio. I think I was probably the weirdest negotiator, because I was always, you know, really holding the companies accountable to their impact on the tallyman. And I was really there to ensure that the tallyman became a voice for what he wanted to see his trapline look like after the project was complete. So, you know, normally people go in and they try to negotiate, you know, impact benefits agreements. Mine was really there to make sure that the tallyman had a voice, because environment was my concern. I think that when you're somebody who works in the space of the environment or as a nature group, you have an area that's of importance to you. But I think if you want to go an extra step and realize the importance of that and how it contributes to other people living in that space, the best way you can do it is to find out which First Nations groups are in your territory and reach out to them. Because sometimes just a Google of learning who's the First Nations group's territory that I'm in, what are issues of importance to them, what kind of fights are they fighting, are they looking to protect water, are they impacted by mining, do they need support in forestry, are they a group that's, you know, seeking to protect a certain wildlife group or habitat of a wildlife? You can really contribute. The networks and the contacts that nature groups have, I find, have been some of the biggest resources for First Nations, especially my nation. We've really had the opportunity to have good working relationships, and the people that that they network with have given us the opportunity to take our story and to take, you know, the events that we've been trying to showcase as ones contributing to the protection of our territory to higher levels. You know, I've had the opportunity to speak from New York to Oxford. I was supposed to go to Madrid, I was not able to go, but to be able to go and share the importance of the forest and to see that there are other people, strangers, other First Nations group that believe in that and that believe that protecting a forest contributes to the fight against climate, that has been a major motivator. That has been a major motivator for me, especially in times, you know, when we were not having successes or we felt the government pushing back. To be able to go out there and network and to get new ideas and to get support and to get direction, you know, from a variety of people has really helped this file. I'm pleased that, you know, I'm the Deputy Grand Chief. Our Grand Chief right now is very much oriented towards ensuring that whatever development comes into the Cree territory is going to be done in collaboration with the Cree. and has made protected areas one of the important high list priorities in his discussions with Quebec. So I do believe that the area of protected networks that we're developing right now will be completed, I hope, in accordance to all of the target deadlines, but I do believe that there will be success for us. So thank you for listening to me. I wish you all the best of luck in your meetings with the MPs, and I hope that, whatever questions you have about First Nations, I'll try to stick around and answer some of them, but, I do hope that you will take into consideration this reconciliation and to share that this is your act of reconciliation with First Nations, that you're doing your part to protect the environment. Ja.
We do have a little bit of time for questions or comments to the Deputy Grand Chief. Anybody would like? B per 8.
I hope this isn't a stupid question, but so it's your territory and you're more or less self-governed, and yet if a mining company wants to come in, do you have the ability and to be able to just say, yep, we discussed it, no, sorry, move on?
With our agreement has 28 different sections. Section 22 is social acceptability. So we in Quebec developed the COMEX table. We have 3 representatives from Quebec and 3 representatives from the Cree side. And they evaluate the acceptability and the environmental assessment and social acceptability of the project. So we work a lot in partnership with Quebec. So if we believe that we want to move forward with the project, we can agree. If we do not believe that it would be something that's, in the best interest of the Cree, we can vote no. We are an equal partner in that partnership. If we do not agree, I think the Cree are probably best known for launching campaigns at an international level. And we've had some major successes. We stopped the Great Whale River Project, which was, we did a major campaign. We canoed from the most northern community all the way to New York. We were able to stop a contract of a power purchase from the state of New York. That was a major international campaign for us. The other campaign, Stratico, we voted no, but we also used public mechanisms to ensure that it was very clear that there was no social acceptability from the Cree. So would we be able to kill a project? As an official process, I think we have to be aware that we are committed in a working relationship with Quebec. So we have a portion of the say, but I think that the Cree are very well known for their work. If we don't like something, we make sure it's well known.
Thank you for your great words. It was really wonderful to hear.
Maybe identify yourself.
Oh, sorry.
No, I should have asked.
Yeah, I'm Davin from the Yukon Conservation Society, and it sounds similar. The agreement that you have in Yukon, we have several different First Nations that also have final agreements, and we have the overarching, the umbrella final agreement, and then final agreements that are related to that. One of the things that is challenging in Yukon is the capacity within the environmental organizations and also the capacity within the self-governing First Nations to actually make the massive efforts that are required to protect the land and make these big conservation goals achievable. Do you have advice for environmental organizations about how to best support the capacity building of the First Nations?
I do. I think that, the number of groups that we've worked with have helped build capacity by ensuring that they have communicated as much information as they could to the local level and kind of adopted a member at the local governance level to, kind of training them in communications, coming to things like this, training sessions like this, really help our members understand what it means to have dialogue with the government, what it means to have dialogue with, a for-profit industry group coming in. I think one of the biggest ones for me was the opportunity to meet with other First Nations and exchange on the different types of scenarios that they have been in. That to me has been capacity building. But I think one of the biggest things that I have appreciated most about my relationships with NGOs is I have always been very adamant that I expect the story to be about my nation. We had an instance where we had an NGO that had like a major issue with the government. They did a news story. We were a blurb in the news story. It was about this NGO. And after that, I really felt like ensuring that we were able to take the space and make sure that, our fight was about a First Nations fight. They respected that. And they built capacity to help us communicate that better. So giving us access to services, helping us network, helping us build partnerships beyond, just their organization has been capacity building. Yeah.
One last question.
Sure.
I was going to follow up on that a bit. I think tomorrow we're going to be asking for some funds towards Nature Challenge. Oh, right, name and organization. Apologies. James Casey, Birds Canada. I think tomorrow that they were going to be asking for some funds, a large chunk of funds towards protected areas. Is there a specific ask for funds around Indigenous protected areas that we should be thinking about?
I am not sure, but I will bet serious money that every First Nations group is looking for funds for protected areas networking. And I think the best way to achieve that is probably to reach out to First Nations organizations like the Assembly of First Nations, Indigenous groups that have networks or associations at a provincial level, or even directly to First Nations communities to introduce yourself, to introduce what you are working on, that you have funding, that you're seeking partnership. And if they're open to working with you, I think that they will come to the table more than willing. I find that with First Nations people, they will always take the opportunity to meet with a group, to hear them out, to see if it's in line with what they're looking for. And if they do not proceed, they will always redirect you or connect you with somebody else that they believe could be better served by you. All right, thank you. Thank you for the questions.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It was a great honor to have you with us. Just a couple of commitments and a takeaway. We will tomorrow be emphasizing a lot the importance of expanded protected area networks in Canada, and we do have as a core message that Indigenous-led conservation efforts and supporting Indigenous protected areas must be at the heart of that agenda. But I think this whole question of articulating what is the financial investment that's required and the homework that's going to be required to work with the AFN, with the Indigenous Leadership Initiative, to ensure that Indigenous partners and voices have thought about what their specific asks are, is a really important one for us to work on going forward. We have so much to learn from the Cree and the Cree Nation government in Quebec. You're right. In some ways, I often think the story of the power of organizing and the work that's been done is almost better known outside of Canada than inside of Canada, because the Cree has mobilized so successfully internationally with Indigenous peoples around the world. And there's so much we can learn. So thank you so much for sharing your experience, your story, and your encouragement for us to continue this work going forward. If everyone just wants to take, we have like 5 minutes. You can have a bio break if you need. We won't talk about toilet paper. Always with us. And if you didn't have a chance to grab dessert, and then come right back, and we'll start up again in 5 minutes.